You won't believe what happened when my HOA decided they had the right to block my entry gate. Yep, you heard that right. One day, out of nowhere, they'd put up a barrier, preventing me from getting in. Now, if you've ever had to deal with an HOA, you know they can be relentless. But this was a whole new level of crazy. They not only blocked my access, but seemed to think they could control my every move. Well, I wasn't going to let that slide. I wasn't just going to sit around and wait for them to make things right. So I came up with a plan, something they'd never expect. Instead of driving through the gate like everyone else, I decided to take things to the next level. What did I do? I flew in a helicopter. And not just anywhere. I landed it right on their clubhouse lawn. The looks on their faces, priceless. But here's the thing, it wasn't just about the dramatic entrance. It was about showing them that they couldn't just block me out without consequences. You won't believe what happens next, so make sure you stick around, because this story is far from over. So, let me backtrack a bit. I've lived in this community for years, and honestly, things had always been fine. Sure, the HOA wasn't the most friendly bunch, but they usually kept to themselves. That was until they started getting more aggressive about rules they claimed I was breaking. It started with small things, like my mailbox being half an inch too high or my fence being a little too tall. I thought, no big deal, right? I could fix that. But when they started getting more personal, it was a different story. One day, I received a notice saying my driveway was blocking access to the neighborhood. The weird part. My driveway had been there for as long as I could remember, and no one had ever said anything before. I tried to talk to them, explain the situation, but it was like they didn't even want to listen. They just slapped on more fines and restrictions, and eventually, they put up that barrier right in front of my gate, effectively locking me out. I was furious. The audacity. I wasn't about to let them dictate my life, especially over something this ridiculous. That's when the idea hit me. If they wanted to block me, I was going to find a way around it, and I wasn't going to do it quietly. I'd make sure they knew exactly who they were dealing with. But just wait until you see what happens next. Trust me, it only gets crazier. At first, I thought maybe I was overreacting. I mean, how bad could it be, right? But the more I tried to reason with the HOA, the more I realized this wasn't just about my driveway or some minor rules. This was about control. They didn't care about what was fair or reasonable. They cared about power. And they had decided that I was their target. Every phone call I made to them was met with the same cold, robotic response. No flexibility, no understanding. Just an ironclad set of rules they weren't willing to bend for anyone, not even a long-time resident like me. I started talking to my neighbors, and to my surprise, many of them had similar stories. Some of them had been fined for things like improperly placing a garden gnome or leaving a trash can out for too long. It was crazy. But what bothered me the most was the way the HOA had slowly been changing the neighborhood's atmosphere. People were starting to live in fear of making mistakes. No one dared to voice their opinions anymore, afraid they'd get slapped with more fines or restrictions. The worst part, it wasn't even just about my situation anymore. The HOA's grip was tightening on the entire community, and I was starting to feel like I was the only one who was willing to fight back. That's when I started planning my next move. I knew the helicopter stunt would get their attention, but I didn't want it to end there. I needed to make a statement, something bigger than myself, something that would rattle them. But as I got closer to executing my plan, I realized things weren't as simple as they seemed. There were other players involved, and they weren't as innocent as they appeared. As I dove deeper into my plan, I started noticing strange things happening around me. The HOA's actions didn't just feel like petty rule enforcement anymore. There was something more sinister at play, and I began to realize I wasn't just up against a group of uptight neighbors. No, there was something bigger behind it. I couldn't quite put my finger on it at first, but the more I dug, the more I realized that the HOA wasn't acting alone. I began to uncover whispers of shady dealings, meetings that no one was supposed to know about, and sudden improvements in the neighborhood that always seemed to benefit certain people, people with ties to the HOA board. It hit me. This wasn't just about enforcing rules. This was about money. Big money. Developers and investors had their eyes on the land, and the HOA was standing in the way of progress. They were willing to do anything to make sure they got their way, even if it meant running people like me out of the neighborhood. The tension was mounting. I wasn't just fighting for my property anymore. I was fighting for the future of everyone in the community. I had to act fast. But here's where it gets tricky. Just as I was finalizing the plans for my helicopter stunt, I got a phone call. It was from someone I didn't expect. Someone on the inside. They warned me to back off. They said I was in over my head. But the deeper I got, the more I realized that this was a fight I couldn't walk away from, no matter what the cost. Now things were getting personal, and the stakes were higher than ever. The warning came in the middle of a quiet evening, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I thought about it for a while, trying to decide whether to trust the tip-off. But there was no turning back now. I had already come so far, and I knew that this fight wasn't just mine anymore. It was for every neighbor who'd quietly been suffering under the HOA's iron rule. Then, as I was finalizing the details for the helicopter, something shocking happened. I got a call from a trusted neighbor, someone who had been with me in this from the start. She was frantic, telling me that someone had just started marking her property. At first, I thought it was just more of the HOA's usual nonsense, but the more she explained, the more I realized this was different. She showed me photos, stakes in the ground, weird markings around her fence, and a notice that was left on her door. The HOA was laying the groundwork for something bigger, something that would displace her and others like her. That's when it hit me like a ton of bricks. The HOA wasn't just trying to push me out. They were planning to force a whole bunch of us out to make room for a new development. I was no longer just dealing with a petty, vindictive neighborhood association. I was up against a massive real estate scheme. And now, it wasn't just my home on the line. It was the entire community. Everything felt like it was spiraling out of control. I had no idea who I could trust, and it seemed like the people I thought were allies were starting to turn. As the pressure mounted, I knew I had to act. But I also knew that stepping into the unknown like this could cost me everything. The stakes had never been higher. But what if the real battle was only just beginning? The tension had reached a boiling point. Everything was set for my dramatic entrance. The helicopter was ready, and I had everything planned down to the smallest detail. As I approached the HOA's clubhouse, I could see the chaos brewing. People were beginning to gather, whispers spreading like wildfire about what was about to happen. I couldn't back down now, not after everything that had come to light. I flew in, the blades cutting through the air with a roar. The helicopter touched down on the clubhouse lawn with a smooth, controlled landing. For a moment, there was silence. Everyone froze. The HOA board members, who were standing by in disbelief, didn't know what to say or do. It was a sight to behold, me standing there, in full control, sending a clear message that I wasn't going to back down. But as I got out of the helicopter, expecting the HOA to crumble under the weight of my defiance, something unexpected happened. A familiar face stepped forward. It was someone I hadn't seen in years, an old friend from high school. He had become a major figure on the HOA board, and it hit me like a punch to the gut. He'd been part of the scheme all along. He knew about the development plans. He knew about everything. He tried to smooth-talk me, acting like he had no idea what was going on. But it didn't take much for me to see the truth in his eyes. He'd been playing me, playing everyone. He wasn't just a part of the HOA. He was at the heart of the whole real estate deal. The stakes were never just about my gate or my driveway. They were about the land, about turning this whole place into something else entirely. I had been so focused on the fight that I never saw the bigger picture. The final twist came when he handed me a contract, a legal document that made everything clear. I could sell my property to the development company and leave. They'd give me a generous payout, or I could refuse and risk losing everything, including my home, as they would use every legal loophole to force me out. I stood there, staring at the contract. The community I thought I was protecting. It was a pawn in a much bigger game. My fight wasn't just for my property, it was for a piece of a larger puzzle. But now, with this ultimatum in my hands, the question was clear. What would I do? Would I walk away with a check and give in to their plans? Or would I risk it all and stand up for everyone who was about to lose their homes? The choice was mine, but it was far from simple. I stood there, holding the contract, my mind racing. It was tempting, so tempting to take the easy way out. The payout would solve a lot of problems. But as I looked around at the people who had supported me, my neighbors, my friends, the ones who had been silently suffering under the HOA's control, I knew what I had to do. I refused the offer. I wasn't going to let them win, not just for me, but for everyone who had been quietly pushed around. We weren't just a community, we were a family, and I wasn't going to let them tear that apart for a quick profit. The fallout was intense, but the truth came to light. The HOA board was exposed for their shady dealings, and the real estate developers were forced to back off. The community rallied together, and for the first time in years, we had a voice. The power had shifted. Looking back, it wasn't just about one man taking on a neighborhood association. It was about standing up for what's right, even when it seems like the odds are against you. In the end, we all came out stronger. And while the fight wasn't easy, it was worth every single second. The HOA thought they could break us, but they didn't. We were still standing, and now we were united.